Very happy to be back here again. I was here last year. And so last year I talked about the PACE trial and the lightning process trial, pediatric trial, and I'm calling it a saga of terrible, horrible, no good, very bad research, and even worse editorial decisions. This is me. Here we are, and this is, I don't know if it's known here, but this is a fairly well-known kids' book in the U.S., Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. So I thought since this was a pediatric trial, it was a good title for this. Okay. I did very intensive, unusual preparations for this talk. You can move the slide, yeah. Okay. Yeah, these were my intensive preparations. This is very rare. I never ironed shirts. The last time I did it was when I gave a talk at Invest in ME a couple of years ago. So anyway, yes, this was a surprise to many people when I posted this earlier. Okay, next slide. So this is the trial I'll be talking about, the lightning process trial. And, you know, the slide's getting cut off at the end, so it just needs to be moved over a little bit or something. The end of the slide's getting cut off.
Chair.
So this trial was published in September 2017. You all might have seen it. Last month I started this is my series, Trial by Error, on Virology blog. I started it 4 years ago last month with a big look at the PACE trial, and my colleague at Columbia, virology professor Vincent Racaniello, allows me to hijack his blog every couple times a week. So thank you for that. So I want to disclose my funding sources. Basically, I crowdfund to support my position at Berkeley. The money goes, I've done this twice, the money goes to Berkeley as donations, and then it goes to my department, and they pay my salary and benefits. No money goes into my pocket. I just get my regular salary, and they cover my health insurance benefits and other benefits, which is like 40% of salary. So I don't actually make that much money. Much of that goes to my benefits. Okay? So I should disclose, Professor Michael Sharp, one of my BFFs, considers these to be conflicts of interest, so I will acknowledge that I have 1,000 plus, which is about how many donations I've gotten this year, conflicts of interest per Michael Sharp. I do want to thank him because the first time I did this last year when I was in Australia, he actually criticized me in a tweet and then tweeted a blog post which included a link to my crowdfunding. So basically, after he criticized me, my donation shot up the next day by about $10,000 over the next few days. So Michael Sharp, thank you for that. Unfortunately, he didn't tweet this year's crowdfunding campaign, so I didn't get the benefit of that. So I just want to point out that he has undisclosed conflicts of interest. He's not really involved in this trial, this lightning process trial, but I just want to point out that they did not disclose to any of their patients that they have ties to disability insurance companies, and they have promised to follow in the PACE protocol international human rights document called the Declaration of Helsinki. And so in that, it's very clear that mandates disclosure of any possible conflicts of interest to the people you're researching on. They didn't seem to think this was important, and their response was, we disclosed to the journals that we had these links to disability insurance companies, but that's kind of silly because basically the Declaration of Helsinki was not designed to protect journal editors and readers, but designed to protect the people you're actually experimenting on. And you can't promise to follow human rights or anything really in your protocol and then just not do it because it's inconvenient or because you don't want to. So I consider that, in my opinion, that's a form of research misconduct, of which the PACE authors are guilty, but they don't see it that way, nor does the Lancet. My other disclosures are that I have, some of you may know, I have a conflictual relationship with the lead lightning process study author and with Bristol University. The lead author publicly had accused me of libel in her inaugural address, and then failed to, when I tried to contact her to find out, what are you talking about? How am I liable to do? What's inaccurate about my work? I never heard back. Subsequently, the Bristol has sent a number of communications to from the Vice Chancellor's office, presumably from the Vice Chancellor, but I don't know exactly, but from his office to the Berkeley Chancellor about my behavior. But anyway, it hasn't worked because I'm still here talking to you, and I'm still getting paid by Berkeley. Berkeley still allows me to crowdfund, and as I pointed out many times to Bristol, or not to Bristol, I pointed out many times in public, we're in an academic dispute, and we're not in an episode of The Sopranos, and I see no excuse for sort of thuggish letters to be sent to me or threatening me with my employment. So I just want to make a point of comparison here. Donald Trump, something happened to this slide. Anyway, that's Donald Trump. My call of Ukraine is perfect. This is supposed to be, yes, the lead investigator of the PACE of the lightning process trial called PACE a Great, Great Trial. Both of these claims are absolutely ridiculous and on their face. They're indefensible claims. And I don't know whether, in both cases, these are self-delusion or whether people are lying. I just don't know, and I don't really care that much. They're just inaccurate statements, clearly, and they can't be defended. So I want to make a few key points. First of all, making tough criticism is not libel. I can defend everything I've said, and I've documented all my claims. Filing freedom of information requests and writing letters to officials about bad research is not harassment. I've been accused of these things. Tearing up papers in public that you think are stupid is not libel or harassment, and from my perspective, it's academic performance art. So some of you may know that I've torn up the PACE trial in public, and a couple of weeks ago in Oxford, I tore up a copy of the lightning process study and threw the pieces in the air. It's academic performance art from my perspective. Libel and harassment apparently to very sensitive people in the UK. We have different standards a little bit, I think, in the US about this stuff. As I pointed out before, if people think I've libeled or harassed them, there are legal remedies for this, which no one has so far taken advantage of for reasons that they can best explain. And I have the right to express opinions, and I will later, about whether something is research misconduct or editorial misconduct. I have a right as a professional, someone with a professional public health degree, and as a journalist to express my opinions about these things. I'm not the person deputized to make authoritative conclusions or officially to determine sanctions or anything like that. But that doesn't deprive me of my right to say these things without being accused of libel or harassment or other things that I've been accused of. So just for talking about peer-reviewed literature, and in one sense it's great, and in the other sense there are problems. It's kind of like, as I think, Churchill on democracy, the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. It's kind of like that. We don't really have another good way to do these things, but it has a lot of problems. There's a Stanford academic, John Ioannidis, who says, who did a very widely read paper called Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. We know from, for example, Retraction Watch and from other things that retractions of scientific studies are at very high levels, more than before. Not because necessarily things are worse, although there's many more papers published, so there are going to be many more bad papers published too, because there's been a proliferation of journals, but also because it's much easier to track things with online access to data, and everybody can read everything, and you can check it against other things, so it's easier now to sort of point out that something's wrong. And part of this happens because there's a lot of pressure to publish, and people want to publish that they got findings or positive results. They don't want to publish that they didn't get results. And journals don't want to publish something which says, hey, we tried this and it didn't work and we didn't get results. So there's a lot of pressure to publish papers, and people's academic careers depend on that. So all these things can help explain why we're in this sort of mess to a certain degree. Can explain why we're in this mess with this entire field of research from this group of people that we've been unhappy with. Okay. So this lightning process study, it's important to understand a couple of concepts. This doesn't work if I take it off the thing, right? I kind of prefer to move around. This isn't electronic? No? No. Can I walk around or no?
No, not too far.
Huh? No, I can't. Okay. So a feasibility trial is sort of a preliminary or a pilot study to test whether you can do a full trial, whether you can get patients, whether it's it's viable or feasible to try to do a full trial. A full trial, we're supposed to then test the information that you obtained in the feasibility trial. They're supposed to be two separate things. A full trial is a completely separate trial. Prospective registration is that there are official registries, so when you start a trial, before you start a trial, you register your trial in this registry. There's a number of them, and you designate which, what are the outcomes you're going to do, what's the trial going to look like, and so on. That's what you're supposed to do, and if you do that before any patients are recruited, that's called a prospective trial, or prospective registration. Retrospective registration is when you enroll patients in a trial, and then you register the trial afterwards, or at some point during that, so then those people weren't registered, weren't recruited before the trial, before registration. They weren't recruited after registration, they were recruited before, and you sort of fold them into the trial. That would be called retrospective registration. So these are important concepts to understand when looking at the lightning process study. Okay? There's a ban on publishing non-prospective trials. The International Committee for Medical Journal Editors, I think that's what that stands for. Anyway, all the journals basically 15 years ago agreed that they were only going to publish prospective trials. No retrospective trials were going to be published. And that's important. Fiona Godley, who's the BMJ editorial director, she testified about BMJ's zero tolerance policy in 2013 testimony to Parliament before the Science and Technology Committee. BMJ, it has to be said, was former British Medical Journal, but the BMJ stable has many, many journals, not just the BMJ, which is the main journal. And she said, as far as we are aware, in the last 2 years, we have not published any trial that has not been prospectively registered. Now, you'll see from this talk that she could not make that statement today because that wasn't what happened with the lightning process trial. The BMJ also has gone on record, basically calling prospective registration the single most valuable tool we have to ensure unbiased reporting of research studies. Why is that? Because if you say in advance what you're going to do, then you sort of have to do it. And you can't sort of then, if you don't register your trial in advance, you can change your outcome measures based on, what looks better. You don't have to report all your results. One of the things in a prospective registration is that you list all your results, so everybody knows what you say you're going to look at and what it's going to be. You can't change that afterwards, sort of like doing a trial protocol. So it's a very valuable tool, and BMJ has made that very, very clear. So anyway, we know there's a lot of case definitions. One of the things that makes this very, very complicated to study is that we don't actually know exactly who has the illness or how you define it. The more specific case definitions specifically say that you have to have post-exertional malaise, cognitive dysfunction, and other symptoms. The trial that has been largely used for many years in the UK was something which just focused on fatigue. And as we know, it's not a fatigue, that's the wrong concept. It really is a different kind of illness than that. I'm not going to go through all these. So next slide. Sorry. So I have a few preliminary thoughts about this study. So the lightning process is what I call, kind of woo-woo, which just means kind of woo-woo. We can sort of figure out what that means. It's sort of basically a mishmash or a goulash of hypnotherapy and life coaching and what's the other one that's on the next slide. But anyway, one of the issues, Brian Hughes has made this point. He's a psychologist in Galway. And basically, if you're making extraordinary claims, that's something that basically defies our understanding of how science works, and you're claiming that it's effective, you have to have actually extraordinary evidence for that. It's not just sort of run-of-the-mill. If you give someone a medication that you have a clear biological mechanism for how it works, and then it works, that's understandable. If you do something like jumping up and down and doing tarot card readings, and that works to cure somebody, then we really have to kind of rethink how we understand how everything works. So if you're making extraordinary claims like some woo-woo process, like the lightning process, is helping people or curing people, then you actually really need to be very careful about how you do your work. And one of the things about research is that it's a pretty core concept in research ethics that when you're doing research on something new that hasn't been researched, you don't start off with children. You start off with adults who can make their own decisions about what they want to do. You do not start research in general unless it's a specifically children's illness or there's some specific reason why you have to do that, it's not what you're supposed to do. So there's not really a good explanation for why they studied this first, except for the fact that the lead investigator is a pediatrician, so that's who she had access to. There are other reasons. So anyway, in doing this, it's sort of a violation of the normal standard by which research progresses. So some key flaws of the study, and there are many, many flaws of the study, but I'm going to focus on ones that I consider make it really a good example of probably research misconduct. There are many other flaws that I'm not going to go into. So the investigators recruited 56 out of 100 participants before the trial was registered. So as I've already said, you can't do that. I mean, you can do that, but you shouldn't be able to get it published. Is everybody hearing me okay? I feel like I'm going in and out of the microphone. Am I talking too fast? No? Okay. Yes? A little bit? So after they gathered data from these 56 am I not holding this in the right way, or is it detaching? I feel like I'm going in and out of, oh, is that better? Okay. The investigators swapped primary and secondary outcomes after they gathered data from this 56% of the participants, because they recruited, after they registered the trial, they recruited 44 more participants. When they published the paper, they actually failed to disclose these facts in the paper itself. So they wrote up the trial, and it was published as if it was fully prospective and that the outcomes were pre-designated, which was not in fact the case. If they'd actually told the truth in their paper, Archives of Disease in Childhood, which published the paper, would not have published it because it would have violated, it would have been clear to the editors that it violated their principles, specifically on trial registration. Archive of Disease in Childhood is one of the many BMJ journals. It's a very highly respected journal, obviously a pediatrics journal. So who is Phil Parker? He founded LP. This is part of his very interesting biography from something called the European College of Holistic Medicine Healing Course. Anybody take this course from Phil Parker? Anybody take any courses from the European College of Holistic Medicine? No, I guess not. Anyway, he's an inspirational teacher, therapist, healer, and author. In doing his work, he discovered that his clients' bodies would suddenly tell him important bits of information about them and their past, which to his surprise turned out to be factually correct. He developed this ability to step into other people's bodies over the years to assist them in their healing with amazing results. So this is Phil Parker, who developed the lightning process. This was his previous effort before the lightning process. Some skills taught in this European holistic course. You can prepare, so he's teaching healers how to heal. He taught you how to prepare a space so that any energy polluting the room will not interfere with the work you are doing. Any energy, any pollution in this room? I haven't taken the course, so I can't clear it. I'm sorry. You learn about use of divination, medicine cards, and tarot. From a healing perspective, divination is useful in creating a strong connection with healing spirit guides. And you also learn about spinning a pendulum, and that's very important because the spinning pendulum can focus your attention on the area of a client's body that needs healing, as its usage relies on energy and changes in energy fields. So this is what you would have learned from Phil Parker had you taken his European course. So what is the lightning process? These are some of the questions from the lightning process website that asks you about, is it indicated for you to take the lightning process? So, I think we all might feel at some points that we're exhausted no matter how much rest we get. Are you stuck with recurring health symptoms and issues? Do you find yourself worrying and feeling really stressed about things? Do you feel regularly feel low and upset? And so on. And if you've tried everything else, like regular healthcare, it's probably time to do something different, and the lightning process could be the answer for you. Okay. So, UK advertising regulators have noticed, have been informed that lightning process practitioners in their advertising have claimed to solve, to cure multiple sclerosis, eating disorders, Parkinson's, whatever it is, they seem to have been able to cure it. In addition to curing, apparently, chronic fatigue syndrome, the advertising regulators have sanctioned, in the negative sense, helping practitioners multiple times for claiming medical benefits of the lightning process. They told them they can't make these claims. And they wrote that advertisers should take care not to make implied claims about the health benefits of the 3-day course and must not refer to conditions for which medical supervision should be sought. Okay, so lightning process practitioners seem to have regularly violated these guidelines and have been called out by the advertising regulators. Okay, so what is the lightning process exactly? This is this is what lightning process practitioners, how they're trained. They have completed a diploma through the Phil Parker Training Institute in Neurolinguistic, NLP, that's the last one, in Neurolinguistic Programming, Life Coaching, and Clinical Hypnotherapy. Following the diploma, Lightning LP practitioners undertake a further course to learn the tools and delivery method required for the lightning process, after which they must pass both the practical and written examination. That makes me feel a lot better. I hope it makes you all feel a lot better about the lightning process as well. It's 3 group sessions over a weekend, and it costs £620. So what is it exactly? So participants are taught that they can change their health through changing their thought patterns. Participants are told not to share what happens in the course. They stand in circles on the ground and yell stop to symptoms. Joan herself can give you more details about this. 2 patient surveys have shown that actually many report benefits, and some report worsening. What we hear also from anecdotal reports, so this is 2 patient surveys of CFS-ME patients. One from, I think, the ME Association, and I think the other was actually for ME. So there were reports actually of people saying they felt better, they got better, or they improved in some form. And then the anecdotal reports are that people had improvements. Then there were quite a few anecdotal reports about people initially had improvements and then that wore off in weeks or months. And that people had post crashes after the lightning process, and there have been some reports of suicide attempts afterward because people felt that they had failed to heal themselves. So why did they do the study in kids when in most cases you would want to do a study first in adults before doing it in kids? Well, first, the lead investigator is a pediatrician at Bristol, so that makes sense that she would be studying kids. Basically, the claim was that there was an urgent need because our argument was that 250 parents or more were sending their kids every year to get the lightning process to treat them for chronic fatigue syndrome. AYME wanted them to do the study and asked them to do the study. Since it's a commercial product and not something that would be offered on at least was offered on the NHS, it was funded by private foundations. Again, standard practice to do studies first in adults. That's one ethical concern. The other ethical concern is the issue of secrecy. If you're doing something where you're not supposed to tell people, that's kind of a telltale sign in children. You're not supposed to tell children not to tell your parents things or not to tell other people things because it's a sign of potential abuse if they can't say what's going on. Or it allows anybody who might engage in potential abuse to kind of hide the fact that they've done that. And so that concern was raised by parents and other advocates, but it was rejected. Now, they had serious trouble recruiting people to the trial, which I find hard to understand given that there was such an urgent need and so many parents, they claimed, were sending their kids to it. So if that was the case, why would they be having such a hard time recruiting kids since the parents were getting the trial for free? So they've never explained why they had so much trouble recruiting people if in fact there was such a desperate, urgent need to do the trial and so many people were doing it without any evidence. So some of the information provided, the lead investigator in one of the, when the trial was presented said that she did it because we heard about people getting better and people getting worse. I was kind of curious. So when the information in the consent leaflet for kids, when they asked for any side effects, there was, we do not think there are any side effects of the intervention. And disadvantage was teenagers with CFS-ME can get worse with any intervention offered. Now I would argue that this is specific about people getting worse that she heard from the lightning process. This is a very generic statement that has nothing to do with the lightning process. So we do not think there are any side effects of the intervention. But you just said that you heard about people getting worse. So even if you don't think it's about the intervention, you actually need to inform people that there are anecdotal reports of people getting worse, not in general from any intervention, but from this specific intervention that you're testing. This is a very, very unethical thing to do. The lead investigator said she had information, which then apparently does not seem to have been shared with the participants in the trial, because she turned a specific concern or specific anecdotal information about what was heard about the lightning process into a sort of generic thing about, well, whatever, any intervention might have some impact in a negative way. That's not cool at all. So this is a timetable. As I said, they did a feasibility study first. Of course, you would do it first before the real trial. That's not unusual. So they did, in September, they started recruiting for the feasibility trial. In the summer of 2012, they registered the full trial as falsely prospective, since they already had that, and it also included folding the ones from the feasibility trial into the full trial. And they also, at the same time, published the full trial protocol, and that included the swap of primary and secondary outcomes from the feasibility trial protocol. So basically, at the same time as they registered the full trial and did their full trial protocol, they took the people from the feasibility trial, put them into the full trial, which they had no place doing, and they changed outcomes after collecting data from the people in the feasibility trial, so they swapped outcomes midway through the trial, essentially. In summer of 2012, and the next year, they recruited for the full trial, and then they published falsely the trial as prospective, and they falsely claimed that, or made it seem like the outcomes were pre-designated when in fact they had swapped the outcomes after 56% of the participants were already done providing data. So the trial itself had 100 kids, 56 from before they registered it, and 44 from after. And that, so it lasted that period of time. Full trial recruitment was 44 more kids. At the end, at the end, they had analyzed data at 6 months from 81. So some people dropped out, some people didn't provide their final data. That often happens in a trial, but you don't, 20%, losing 20% is, sort of significant, and there are different ways you can analyze that. But you really need to assume that those who dropped out likely did worse, because otherwise they might not have dropped out. They didn't provide that analysis. So one of the big problems with this study, and with all the study from the CBT GET fan club, or the ideological brigades, as I sometimes call them, is that it's an unblinded study with self-reported outcomes. That means that basically everybody knew what intervention, whether they were getting the intervention or whether they were getting, just the regular care. And since they were told that this is, supposed to make you better, or they were given the impression that this could make you better, and at the end, there's no objective outcomes. All you do is say, hey, do you feel better, or are you less tired? It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a genius to figure out that the people who were in the part where they were told they were going to get better are more likely to say, hey, I feel better, because they want to feel better. Maybe they like the therapist. They don't want to disappoint themselves. They don't want to disappoint the researchers. So there's a natural human tendency. That's the placebo effect. Nothing really happened, but you say you felt better, and you think you felt better, and maybe you do feel better briefly, and then you're on a high because you were in this trial or the lightning process that kind of boost you up, and you think you can change your thoughts, and so you sort of have this impression that you're better, but not necessarily true. That's a placebo effect. So the official conclusion, not yet. Sorry. The official conclusion was the lightning process is effective when provided in addition to standard medical care for mild to moderately affected adolescents with CFS-ME. Okay, so this is the second timeline. It was published in fall of 2017. On the Science for ME forum, people started saying things about the time frame and how come they were recruiting in 2010, and the trial was registered later, and so I got interested in that. I started looking at the documents. I think I filed one. Some of them are available. I think I filed one or two of the Freedom of Information request. Anyway, on Virology blog, I basically wrote a very long investigation about why this was completely bogus and badly done. And then in January 2018, we sent a letter from Virology blog to the journal saying this is just, you know, really nonsense. You can't do the things that were done in this trial, and you have to explain what was going on. So in June 2018, Archives of Disease in Childhood posted an editor's note in what I call the journal equivalent of Siberia. In other words, normally if you publish a correction, it's right on the trial, it says correction. You know, and you look at your trial and you know it was corrected. This note was published like on a completely other page, so no one would ever see it. I presume that's why they did it. I have no reason why they did it, but it was on a completely other page and nobody ever saw it, except maybe me. And then when I wrote about it, then maybe other people saw it. But I mean, some people saw it, but basically if you were doing a review of the literature, you would never have come across it unless you thought to click on a link that took you to that page, because there was nothing on the study, and if you downloaded the study, there was nothing there that said, there's been major questions raised about this trial, because basically the editor's note essentially confirmed everything and said they're waiting for information from the authors. Actually they said they had gotten information from the authors, but it was under editorial consideration. One of the examples of why this is a problem is that in March 2019, there was a high-profile review of pediatric illness, pediatric treatments for CFS, they called it. Maybe they called it CFS. Maybe they called it CFSME, I can't remember. But they cited the lightning process trial in the abstract as effective, because whether they'd seen the editor's note or not, I don't know, but I presume not. So finally, this June, Archives published a correction clarification, and they republished the paper with the original findings. The correction clarification ran to about 3,000 words. The trial itself was about 5,500 or 6,000. So it's sort of extraordinary to have a 3,000-word correction about every aspect of a study, pretty much. That's, you know, half as long again as the study. And they also published an 800-word editor's note that basically twisted itself into pretzels, trying to explain why the study was republished and not retracted. So here's the problem. They did a protocol for the feasibility trial, although it wasn't registered. So in the feasibility trial, the primary outcome was school attendance, and they said promised to do this in two ways: self-reported and getting the official school records at 6 months. One of multiple secondary outcomes was self-reported physical function on the SF-36 scale. It's a questionnaire, also used in the PACE trial, at 6 months. When they did the full trial protocol and in the published paper, the primary outcome was now self-reported physical function at 6 months, and school attendance had been relegated to a secondary outcome. And now they did not publish the school records. They only published the self-reported school attendance, not the school records. And it's important to say that school attendance sounds like an objective measure, but self-reported school attendance is a subjective measure, because again, I might say I went to school X amount of days because I think that's what would be a better result, or I may forget that I skipped one day or something like that. So self-reported school attendance is a subjective measure, slightly more objective perhaps than fatigue or physical function, but it is not an objective measure. If you're actually going to do a good study, you need to get official records and document that they actually went to school those days. In the published results, there were modestly positive results for the SF-36 at 6 months. There was, this keeps falling down. Maybe hold it like this, maybe that's better. And they improved 12 points on a 100-point scale, so that's a pretty modest improvement. Not great, but something. But again, everybody knew what intervention they got, and they just asked them, are you more physically able to do things? It doesn't take much to get somebody to make and that's basically 2 changes on a questionnaire, 2 different answers than in the beginning. So it's not that big a deal. They had no results. In other words, there was no difference for school attendance at 6 months. Now, they claim to have set positive results for secondary outcomes, anxiety, depression, fatigue, also all self-reported. And they did report that school attendance at 12 months was improved. But again, they did that as self-report, there was no mention of the records that they had promised to provide. So you can either assume that they didn't get the records, or they got the records and they weren't very good. So they didn't include the actual school records, but they made something of a big deal about improving school attendance at 12 months. Of course, the fact that school attendance didn't improve at 6 months was sort of buried and not mentioned very much in the paper, and wasn't mentioned at all in the reporting about the study, even though it was the original primary outcome, and they only changed it after they got data from 56% of the population that they studied. So the outcome swapping was not disclosed in the paper. You cannot do that. You cannot not mention that you swapped your outcomes halfway through. To not mention that, in my opinion, and I'm saying my opinion all the time because it is my opinion, and I'm not categorically stating that it's research misconduct to legal reasons. I'm saying it's my opinion. To not disclose it in the paper is, my opinion, research misconduct. Without the outcome swapping, the investigators would have had to report null results for their primary outcome, and so the conclusions, they couldn't claim it was effective on their primary outcome. They could only claim it was effective on their kind of wishy-washy secondary outcomes. So that's also a form of, I think, research misconduct. The Science Media Center, I don't have much good to say about them. They promoted it, had a press conference, and there was enthusiastic media coverage in the UK press. Controversial lightning process helps children with chronic fatigue syndrome. This is where she says, we heard people were getting better and people getting worse. Then she says, I was kind of curious. I never expected that it would work. Well, it didn't work. It only worked because you changed your outcomes. And in fact, it's hard to understand why anybody would be surprised if you change your outcomes to the more positive outcome. Why would you be surprised that it worked? That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. It seems like an extremely disingenuous comment from the lead investigator. The editor's note said that in June 2018, basically this is the June 2018 editor's note. That was after we sent our letter, and basically they said, we've acknowledged these comments. They kind of claim that this, basically they couldn't really refute the documentation, and they got clarifications from the authors which were under editorial consideration. So I had complained a lot about that editor's note. One, because I didn't see, it took me about 10 minutes when I looked at the data, the documents, to figure out what had happened, and that this was all really bogus and poorly done, and in fact that they had not told the truth in the paper. So you didn't need to spend a whole year between the editor's note and the final correction to actually figure it out. So I kept saying, how long is your editorial consideration going to take? I also complained about the fact that nobody in the world was ever going to see the editor's note. So nobody would know that there was a problem with this trial at that point. After many letters to Fiona Godley, the editorial director of BMJ, so she was sort of the overarching editor over the whole thing, she sent me this very peculiar, what I thought was a very peculiar email, in which she said, asked the person I was dealing with, mentioned that you were concerned that the notice. I don't know if I'm going to use this anymore.
I think the acoustics would be okay without the speaker. Actually, why don't you stand closer?
I can't because the.
Oh, no, but just reach the microphone.
It's closer. I mean, I don't. Can everybody hear me if I talk loudly?
Yes.
So, so she said, mention that you were concerned that the notice on the Archives of Disease in Childhood paper was not prominent enough. We are looking into, actually, do we need this for the live streaming? Will I be heard on the live streaming without this?
I don't know.
Yes, no, does anybody know?
It should be okay. It should be fine.
Yes, is this okay just to talk?
Yeah.
Okay. We're looking into whether this can be made more prominent. Our systems don't make this entirely easy. Now, this was preposterous to me. Does anybody actually think that BMJ, a major medical publisher, doesn't have a single IT person in their office that can move a link from one page to the page where the paper's on? I wasn't sure what this was about. I didn't understand how an editor could make this comment. She must have known this was a silly comment. She must have known that I would know it was a silly comment. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to sort of accept in a kind of nice deferential way that we all agree that this doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to accept this. But it seemed to me ridiculous at the time. Okay. So actually, I probably need to use this because I have to look here. Sorry. So anyway, they published the massive correction finally in last June. As I said, 3,000 words. It acknowledged all the concerns I had raised, and then it republished the study with the originally reported findings. So I would say that there was dismay and disgust among researchers who actually care about scientific integrity and understand that editors have an obligation to protect medical literature. My faculty colleagues really don't understand why BMJ and Dr. Gottlieb want to damage their reputations in this way, and why they don't seem to be really concerned about the poor science they're doing and the impact it's having on children's health, or that it could have on children's health. So this is the correction. You can see they posted, you can see the IT people managed to put the correction on the actual study. I don't know why they couldn't do that with the editor's note, but somehow their systems allowed them to do this, but the IT people couldn't figure out how to put the editor's note there. Very strange. Maybe they got a new IT person between the first note and the second. Okay, so the editor's note accompanied the correction. The final version includes acknowledgement from the authors that the study was not fully ICMJE compliant, except it didn't include an explanation for why it wasn't compliant and why they decided not to leave out that information. I mean, you can't do that. Like, how many times I've said this? You can't do what they did, but they did it and it was published anyway. I thought this line was preposterous. The process has additionally involved seeking assurance from the authors that the change in primary outcome was not influenced by positive findings in the feasibility phase. Now, I was speechless when I saw that. I'm not that often speechless. The whole point of bias is that you don't know you're biased. The whole point of good trial design is to weed out bias, because you can't weed out your own bias. So it's pointless to ask the investigators who already didn't put the truth in their own study whether they were biased by it. Of course, what are they going to say? Yes, we were? Of course they're not going to say that. It's like asking the president of Ukraine, sitting next to President Trump, if he was pressured by Trump. And he's going to say, yes, he was? Of course not. It's ridiculous. They're in a sort of situation where they've been caught doing something naughty. And in here, they say, oh no, we didn't do that naughty thing even though you caught us. It's ridiculous. The other line was, BMJ policy requires prospective registration of randomized trials, but we do not consider a failure to enforce that policy ground for retraction. Okay, so you can violate a policy that BMJ says is essential or critical to preventing bias in trials, but they didn't do it, they didn't tell us about it, that they didn't do it, so it doesn't really matter, we'll let them do the trial, we'll let them republish their original findings anyway. It is absolutely ridiculous, and I was beyond whatever when I saw that. So after that, I organized an open letter to Dr. Gottlieb about BMJ's ethically bankrupt actions. This is my habit, to send open letters, see if other people will sign them. This one had 56 signers from, Harvard, Berkeley, University College London.
Sounds horrendous. I wonder what it'll be all right.
I can't hear you.
Sounds horrendous.
Can't pick out your words because it's breaking up.
But I don't, what should I do?
Maybe do it without.
You'll be okay without it. I think you'll be all right, yeah.
Without the mic.
Just not use
No,
it?
yeah, I think so. I don't know.
It's too crackly.
So I organized a letter. There were 55 signers, from top universities, including a few, mostly U.S. unfortunately, but a few Australia, a few from elsewhere, a few from UK, of course, we got no response. You could move the.
No, go on, you're all right.
Signed by 55 experts. These are some of the statements in it. If I read them facing this way, I can't read them because I can't face you, but you can all sort of see them. They're very tough. It was a tough letter. Basically, BMJ's actions are scientifically and ethically indefensible. They are also potentially harmful to the health and well-being of children. It's very difficult to get scientists who are not involved in a study to sign letters that are that tough unless they really, really feel that what has happened is egregious. It's just not something that scientists usually want to do because they're not political. They don't want to get involved in that, and they don't want to criticize the top editor of a major publishing company. But it wasn't that hard because everybody could see that this was a likely research misconduct, or at least very, 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 very bad work. After that, about a dozen or more sent letters themselves directly to Dr. Godley, criticizing the study and demanding that it be retracted. Some of these letters themselves were also very, 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 very tough. And I was very pleased to see that because basically I've done a fair amount of these open letters. A fair amount of these, to get in there, I see. I've done a fair amount of these open letters, and you know, people probably think, oh, he can get whatever to sign his open letters. That's not really true because a lot of people won't sign them because they don't want to get involved. But anyway, it really has more of an impact if people write their own individual follow-ups. So there were about a dozen of them, and I posted them all on Virology blog, so I'm not going to read them, but there's another slide of them. This was a good one. Harvard Medical School. I am appalled at this situation. It's very tough for someone from Harvard to send the top editor to BMJ. I am appalled at your behavior, essentially. Brian Hughes from Galway basically said it wouldn't have been published in the first place had you known of these problems, so it shouldn't have been published after the fact with the same things. And he basically, you know, they all said it should be retracted. And basically he points out that other people will do the same thing because they know if they get caught, they can just get published in BMJ. So they're basically saying, you know, if you do this thing wrong that we've said for 15 years we won't do, and then you don't tell us, well, it's okay, we'll let you get it through anyway. It is so ridiculous and so wrong. I don't know how to emphasize that enough, but I think you all know. So, Waiting for Godley, thank you Samuel Beckett for this title. Waiting, more waiting, and I'm still waiting for an answer for her and some action on BMJ's part, which, you know, is probably not coming. So, is it a case of research misconduct? I think you already know my opinion on that. But these are parts of the definitions of research misconduct from the Medical Research Council and from the National Institutes of Health in the US. Medical Research Council is in UK, obviously. So misrepresentation of data, for example, suppression of relevant findings and or data, or knowingly, recklessly, or by gross negligence, presenting a flawed interpretation of data. Now, this is important because knowingly or recklessly or by gross negligence doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it intentionally. If it's gross negligence, it might be unintentional. We can argue whether we think it was done intentionally, but we can't really know. But in any event, it doesn't matter because it was certainly done by gross negligence. It's grossly negligent not to provide the details that they did not provide. Same with, not yet, same with the NIH has the same thing, manipulating research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results such that the research is not accurately represented in the research record. Obviously, that was the case in this case. So again, is it a case of editorial misconduct? That's not necessarily a kind of a formalized concept, but I would say this is egregious editorial misconduct because Fiona Godley, I assume, is a smart person. I've never met her personally, but you know, she rose to a certain level, and she's probably pretty smart. And it's unbelievable to me that she couldn't know that the study wouldn't have been published had the researchers been honest with what they had done, because she said as much in her talk in front of Parliament that we haven't published these trials in the last few years, as far as she knows, the last 2 years anyway. So she must have known that the study wouldn't have been published had they been honest. And she must have known that it's completely invalid to republish the original findings as if nothing were wrong. Now, I just want to say that had they republished the study and used the original primary outcomes as the final primary outcome, they would have had to republish it. I wouldn't have thought that was a good decision, but at least they would have had to republish it, acknowledging that they had null results for their primary outcomes and they had some positive indications for their secondary outcomes. And it would have gotten completely different press, and it would have been a completely different situation, because the primary outcome is what's important. Secondary outcomes are called secondary for that reason. Your primary outcome you pick at the beginning has to be the primary outcome you present at the end. Not yet?
Oh, sorry.
So her decision to enable and republish this bit of, quote, research is extremely disturbing, and it's completely 100%, 500% unacceptable. And concern about reputational damage by retracting a study, which is a black mark on everybody involved, appears to outweigh any concern for children's health and well-being, because as we know, the BMJ and Bristol have put their seal of approval on the lightning process, not just once now, but twice, with this horrible, horrible study. And, you know, it's really quite disgraceful on everybody's part. Okay. So that's basically it. Oh, I meant to, these are my thanks. So basically I want to make it clear that most of my work, or maybe all of my work in this field, I've gotten a lot of the information, or much of the information from patients who were there analyzing this data and these studies before I was ever knew anything about it. So I'm not so brilliant, I'm just good at taking information and examining it, seeing if it's so, and then packaging it in a way that's understandable and bringing in my academic colleagues to also say, hey, this is horrible. I meant to take off my iron shirt, but I will take it off now because I'm wearing just the top. This is my first shirt that my friend Anil Vanderzee in Amsterdam made for me, so I'm very proud of it, so I'm taking this off. Vincent Racaniello, who's my colleague at Columbia, who's basically trusted everything I've done and posted it without any questions. Ronald Davis, these are my the five experts who, in my first PACE investigation, were willing to put themselves on the record to say in different ways, this is a ridiculous study and it needs to be looked at again, because it was very hard to get people uninvolved in this field generally. Well, a couple of these are involved, but it was very hard to get people even involved in the field on record saying this stuff is bullshit or nonsense or whatever you want to call it, or a piece of crap, as I've called the PACE trial. So Berkeley's been wonderful to me. They've basically let me continue despite having complaints from Berkeley, because they looked at them and saw no validity. Bristol complained about my actions and behavior without ever indicating that I was inaccurate or that I'd done something wrong. They just didn't like my behavior, whatever that is. So Berkeley doesn't think particularly that my behavior, as long as I'm within grounds, and carrying up papers in public is well within grounds of allowed commentary for a professional journalist or a professional public health person. And my faculty colleagues at the School of Public Health at Berkeley who recognize bullshit. The PACE trial is used now regularly in epidemiology classes, coursework as a case study of terrible research. So I'm very happy. That's not me, that was my colleagues, once I showed it to them, who started using it that way. And everybody who signed my open letters, I really appreciate it. So that's my spiel.